GitHub in 2025 with April Yoho.
The Azure DevOps Podcast is a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Each show brings you hard-hitting interviews with industry experts, innovating better methods, and sharing success stories. Listen on to learn how to increase quality, ship quickly, and operate well. And now your host, Jeffrey Palermo.
Welcome to the show. I'm Jeffrey Palermo, your host for helping your teams move fast, deliver quality, and to run your software with confidence in Azure, all while using everything that the .NET ecosystem has to offer. The podcast is sponsored by ClearMeasure, a full-service software architecture and engineering firm that serves companies using .NET technologies, building mission-critical software, rescuing troubled projects, and empowering software delivery with a proven approach. I'm excited that my latest book, published in December, has been getting some good traction. It's about software leadership. It's called The 5 Pillars, Leadership for Effective Custom Software. The book is for anyone who's attempting to make a custom software team highly effective. And so if you want your team to deliver world-class results, this book could be for you. Teams are also doing book studies and discussions around it and using that to help their retrospective meetings be more effective. I'm excited about that. And if you, dear listener, would like a complimentary electronic copy of the book, you can just send me an email and I'd love to get it to you. And you can also get it hardcover, softcover, Kindle, and on audible.com. And for those of you who are in a lead architect or a software lead position, you might want to join our monthly architect forums. Those are interactive, deeply technical discussions, and I enjoy facilitating those. You can sign up on clearmeasure.com. And we've also launched a new lead engineer live stream for senior engineers who are looking to get into software development leadership. My guest today on the show is April Yoho. She is a senior developer advocate and DevOps practice lead for GitHub, specializing in application transformation and DevOps ways of working. Her focus is working on Microsoft Azure to take customers on a journey from legacy technology to serverless and containers, where code comes first while enabling them to take full advantage of DevOps. April was previously a cloud consultant and solution architect for various partners in the UK and brings her years of experience in helping customers plan their journey. And she also serves as a Hashicorp Ambassador, dedicating a lot of her time to working with infrastructure as code. She enjoys making all kinds of technology in Azure and GitHub and their features more accessible. Her technical expertise includes PowerShell, Golang, occasionally TypeScript, C#. In her free time, April enjoys outdoor activities such as hiking, skiing, scuba diving. And additionally, she's a triathlete who competes in Ironman and Half Ironman events. Welcome. Welcome to the show. How are you?
Thank you, Jeffrey, for having me. Really good to be here. I'm doing well today.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. It's always so fun to have someone with such deep expertise in the software world. And you're all about GitHub and promoting it. And GitHub Universe happened not too long ago. And you spoke at .NET Conf. And I want to get into that. But before we do that, there's a group of listeners who probably haven't heard you speak before and are just getting to know you. And so if we could back up just a little bit, are there any highlights or turning points in your technology career that might have steered you into kind of focusing on the types of things that you're focusing on today?
Absolutely. So for those of you listening who I've not met before, I've actually was born and bred in the US and I've moved to the UK and I've been here over 12 years now. So I'm a split dual nationality person. And I think for me, my move to the UK was actually prompted by an incident at the company I was working for in the US, but it also prompted me to change not career paths, but technical focuses. I was working for a company in the US and we had some major outages in our data centers. I needed a different way of working, a different way of life. I was working long days. I remember being up for 72 hours one time, fixing our data centers after a massive outage. And I'm like, there's got to be a better way. I ended up moving to the UK and doing a lot with Microsoft 365, which was O365 at the time, and worked for a managed service provider. And I had a customer that started asking about Azure. And I remember talking about the cloud back when I lived in the States. And I said, yeah, it's not going to go anywhere. It's not going to go anywhere. And it started to. Azure started to become a thing. And in 2013, I built out my first migration and infrastructure in Azure. And I thought, this is fantastic. Then I started learning about infrastructure as code. I did not like ARM when using Azure, and I morphed that into using Terraform. So I started to learn to automate, and then I started moving around the development stack and moved to an engineering role. So very much the outages, the pain points, the countless hours without sleep and tears caused me to pick up my life, move country, and then start using the cloud and start automating. So 100%, it was worth it at the time. Well, looking back, it was worth it. At the time, I didn't think it was, but it was a massive career shift for me.
Yeah. Sounds like it. Well, it seems like you're all over the place, speaking and going from conference to conference, helping customers. And we'll include links in the show notes to GitHub Universe and .NET Conf and others. But it's 2025, and so many people have heard of GitHub Copilot and Workspaces and whatnot. But for those who didn't get an update from GitHub Universe for 2025, what are like the big points that developers should not miss with GitHub?
So I think there's a couple things. The first thing is GitHub's ability as an end-to-end platform. So people have talked about using GitHub, and they've used other tooling for their CI/CD, code repos, etc. GitHub has evolved from a source code repository that initiated back in 2008 to a full end-to-end platform, and very much enterprise focused. So a lot of the feature sets have been around security and compliance, what we can do to leverage scalability for enterprises and security. So we have a huge push on security. And then there's a lot about AI. So if you haven't heard about AI, you're probably living under a rock. We made a lot of announcements at Universe around agentic AI, using agents to be able to do different tasks. And so Copilot was no longer just tabbing through code suggestions, but actually having a conversation, having a rubber duck. So we've moved it into just making the whole developer flow a lot smoother and a lot faster. So there's a lot of features coming into that, plus changing the models. We've gotten a lot with the different types of models, so you get different types of outputs, and it increases the capability of the AI component. So it's been a massive shift for us.
Yeah. I want to ask you a question about vision, because there's the GitHub, there's Copilot, and then there's Codespaces. Just from the market and how you see it, is it a bigger tension to spin up environments quickly, regardless of hardware, like in Codespaces? Or what's the market tension that Codespaces specifically looks to satisfy?
It ticks a lot of boxes in the market, and it's actually an unknown feature that people don't often use or know about. So I want to start off with saying Codespaces has a free element. Every human has access to 60 hours free on Codespaces. Now that changes based off of the compute you're consuming and the amount of data, so how big your repository is. But a Codespace is effectively Visual Studio Code in the cloud. So it's your favorite IDE in the cloud, but it's in a secure, containerized environment. So when you're using it, you have a secure place to write your code, which is really critical. But then also, it doesn't matter what machine you're working on. You can work from any web browser as long as you have access to a keyboard and a web browser. You can run it off a tablet because it's completely cloud-based. You're using someone else's computer. But the really cool part about it is, I often work on different types of machines. And how many times have we worked in teams where, 90% of the people are on the Mac, are using a Mac, and then I'm using a Windows device. I've worked on split teams where we have Linux, Windows, and Macs, where it worked on one machine and not the other because the chipset's different, et cetera. Or we've run out of compute on our local machine to just be able to run tests and run our code locally. So it negates all those problems. It worked on my machine goes out the window. It also means faster time to write code. Developers don't have a lot of time in their day to write code. I thought when I started writing code, oh, cool, I get to do this for 8 hours a day. No. About 25 to 30% of my time is actually writing code. The rest of the time I'm waiting on compute, I'm in meetings, I'm doing ceremonies, I'm doing other things, writing documentation. I don't get to actually write code as much as I thought I would get to.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, it's how do you get started on a project faster? It lowers the barrier to entry for so many people.
So I'm curious, and showing my age, the term dogfooding used to be used a lot in the Microsoft world. I haven't heard so much specifically in recent years, but for the GitHub product teams and the Microsoft product teams, what segments of them are using Codespaces and choosing to do that aspect versus doing it all locally on the local machine? What scenarios have been adopted internally?
So I'm going to talk about the GitHub side first because it's a little bit more relevant to what I'm doing day to day. So
Sure.
GitHub builds GitHub using GitHub, flat out. Whether you're in marketing, engineering, sales, everyone uses GitHub. So with that, when you start on a code repository, You can clone that code locally, or you can spin up a code space. Almost every single GitHubber, we call them hubbers, use code spaces in their day-to-day work. A really good example is the github.com code base. It is so large, requires a lot of compute, and we have a lot of security compliance and access requirements around it. So if I want to access the github.com website, I need to spin up a code space. And we have what's called a dev container file, which specifies what compute we need in that code space, what permissions are set, running scripts. It does all sorts of great stuff. Also, it brings over the extensions we need. So if you think of working on a new project and you're like, right, what languages is this in? What packages do I need? It's all pre-baked into that dev container file. So I spin up the code space and we're good to go. So I can start coding right away. I can literally push code on day zero. And I did when I started at GitHub. So everyone at GitHub is using a code space when they're doing stuff with code. There are times to work locally. We often work locally on more longer running projects. And I only say that because also with my team, we're in developer relations. We do a lot of video and a lot of content. We often run in VS Code because we're running demos. However, when I run a lab or a hackathon, it's always in a code space.
That's a good point. There's scenarios where certain reasons become more important to customers than others. But the lab scenario, just training and having everyone be able to do the same thing, that seems like a slam dunk for code bases.
Oh, it's huge. Absolutely huge. I will not run a lab without a code space anymore. And it's funny because I was in front of a customer last week in London, and the person I was paired up with a colleague who was in charge, and I was there to help and assist. And they handed me the hands-on lab to review before we went on site. And I said, why are we not using code spaces? Oh, the customer has them blocked. So we had to prepare the machines for the lab. So my colleague had to get on site early, spend about 3 hours fixing issues. Then when we got into the lab, about 50% of the people at best could actually access the environment through VS Code on the demo machines. So we ended up having to bail on the hands-on lab and run a completely different workshop. And, my colleague, most credit to him, made it work, made it amazing. However, that's the exact reason why we just don't run stuff locally for events like that. It's just too much risk. And also, the biggest thing is, I live in the EU. Well, I live in EMEA. I can't say the UK is in the EU anymore, but we do have European law. And with that, we have a lot of questions around data residency and laws coming into the EU. And I often get customers talking about data residency. And one of the first questions I ask is, well, where do your developers put their code? And they're like, well, on our laptops. And I'm like, how do you manage levers? How do you manage access to that? So that's the biggest reason why for code spaces, especially for very secure code environments, we use GitHub Codespace, especially for the GitHub.com code base. We don't want to clone that code to our machine. Plus, it takes us 45 minutes just to clone the code alone, whereas I can spin up a code space in less than a minute. So just right then and there, I'm saving 44 minutes.
Sure. Well, you mentioned AI, and if developers haven't heard of it, they've been living under their rock. And certainly no listeners of this podcast are uninformed about AI because we've been kind of bullish on just that topic and the vision. Copilot, there seems to be so many versions of Copilot, regardless of what Microsoft does with the name, but the Copilot Edits versus the chat and the multi-model. Can you kind of decipher and update us on how we should be thinking about GitHub Copilot and the different flavors?
Yeah, so we've put in different licensing, i.e. we've released Copilot for free. I think that's probably the easiest way to say that. We've given everyone Copilot, GitHub Copilot, which is great. It has limited features, limited capability, and in an enterprise environment, that's not ideal for various reasons. But with that, with Copilot, Copilot started off in, and I want to say 2022, might be 2021. My mind is like blending into the years these days. I want to say it was 2022 when Copilot came out, and it was there to help create and write code faster, 100%, and it did. But what GitHub wanted to focus on was the developer experience. That's number one. One, developer happiness. Two, what does the developer experience look like? And that means from beginning, so the inception of an idea to delivery of that to production. And that's where the focus has been for Copilot. So with all these things, all these entities, all these versions and flavors of Copilot, it's all Copilot, but we wanted to enable developers from that end-to-end capability, not just in your IDE with one element. So we've created the agents so that Copilot can do various things in that end-to-end delivery model. So we have things where, you have inline capability. You can still kind of tab through and understand what your code is doing. and chat is still there to have that conversation. But what's been really good is the ability of chat to add context. So meaning you can add files to that, various files to understand things. You can look at the entire code base. So we've gone from just looking at a couple lines of code in one file to entire code bases. We've moved to being able to edit multiple files at once because the reality is there's dependencies across files. So we've recognized that. So how can we help developers update all of those files? Well, that's edits. And then with the different agents, it's things like also extensions, third-party extensions. And we'll probably touch on that a little bit later. But the reality is you're not just going to be writing code in GitHub. You're going to be writing code in other places using other tools. So we're bringing in a lot of extensions and third-party capability. So we've done all of that, which is a lot. And with the help of our partners and amazing engineering teams, that's really come to fruition. But then also things like, okay, I've written code. How do we know if it's good? And that's been the big question. Whether you're a junior developer, senior developer, people go, well, what if my code's not good? And we get a lot of senior developers that are like, well, I could do this better. So it's about iteration. It's about that context. And then what we've done a lot of is we've added like explanations into Copilot. Why? Why is it doing that? And if it doesn't have the right context, we can change it. We can prompt it again. We can give it instructions. We can give it prompt commands to help better the utilization of it. So it's no longer just what I would call prompt engineering, but it's a whole different way that we prompt the models. And that's translated into even things like you could do code review within VS Code. So I've made a bunch of code changes. I can ask Copilot to review my code before I send up my PR because we've all been there. We go to send up our pull request going, oh God, people are going to look at this. They're going to rip it apart. It's going to be terrible. Yeah. So I'll do my code review. I'll iterate. I'll send it up. And then from there, we've added features to add Copilot as a PR reviewer, and do pull request reviews. That's been fantastic. Adds another set of eyeballs, makes suggestions, catches security issues. We've put Copilot into our security suite. So we've really, I'm going to say, injected Copilot from that initiation all the way to delivery. And I haven't even touched on Workspaces, but Workspaces is there to be a future vision of what we really want to do with helping cut down on that delivery time.
Well, speaking of that, and of course on the Visual Studio Code website, there's demo videos of GitHub Copilot. Well, the word agent is used, and then the word Copilot Edits are used. And I sometimes get confused, like, is there a difference? Is that the same thing? But it's showing some spectacular demos of multi-file edits, and almost like if enough instruction is given, then in front of my eyes, the code that might be pretty similar to the code that I would have written in my code base kind of gets laid out in front of me, and I've got an enhancement ready to go. Where's the status of that, and how much of that are GitHub developers already using? Is it prime time for what scenarios already?
I think I like the word interconnectedness, the dependency model. When we look at dependencies across our code bases, if I'm editing one file, what else is it impacting? For me, a really simple answer to that is writing tests. Mm-hmm. I love using edits for tests. I will reference my file in the test file. I can run my test after it's done that. But we see a lot of people looking at those dependencies in their code bases. So often they'll say, okay, we're pushing some code to maybe our front end. It impacts our back end or the infrastructure behind it, et cetera. So whenever there's dependencies, edits is fantastic. But I think also when you're trying to, let's say, build a website, update an image, something as simple as that, mm-hmm. we can do that in chat, yes. But actually, we're going to update the image and let's add documentation to our project and do this and do that. So I think one thing I love doing is anytime I make a change in my project, in my files, I ask Copilot to create a README. So I'll ask it for code comments as to why it did the thing it did, and I'll ask it to create a README. So it generates an output. It's adopted my file, and it's also had the ability to write tests for me. So I have 3 files automatically right there that have been amended and created and modified. Mm-hmm. I think where we really see it come to life is instances like that. We need to do multiple things at once. So yes, we need to edit a file, but where's our documentation? What tests do we have against it? Simple, even a simple task, you can then output those 3 different files and be a few steps ahead of the game. So we're seeing a lot more people not really know about edits and all the different agent capabilities yet, but start to explore it and go, okay, now here's the use case I can use it for, and find some great features for it. Yeah,
well, for the ones who don't know about it yet, I think, can we count on our fingers the number of weeks that it's been kind of publicized?
It's new. And it keeps changing too. I logged in the other day and I'm like, oh, wow, everything's different again.
Right.
Well, here we go.
With ChatGPT, some 2022, and then Copilot like right on the heels of all this, just the breakthrough with large language models. And it's been a whirlwind since then. And so I think it's safe to say this year, next time, so much has changed. But so I want to ask you about long-term vision, regardless of what bits are available today and what capabilities are really ready and useful today. This is moving fast, and you're having like strategy discussions and planning. And what are you and your colleagues, what are you convinced that will be the reality? I've heard terms like AI-driven development and being able to go 2x, 5x, 10x faster with one senior engineer. So what is that future that GitHub is striving for and really thinks is realistic?
So I can't speak for GitHub on that specifically. I can tell you that we do talk about the 10x developer a lot. Thomas speaks about that. He's made that very well known. We want to deliver that 10x developer. And, the reality is we take on a lot of repetitive tasks and things that maybe we can spend better time being more creative. So I think what we'll see a lot more of is developers are a lot faster to do things, but also more accurate and more secure. And yes, that 10x developer is definitely what GitHub wants to push for, but also that developer experience. We had a metric come out, I want to say in the last year, about 75% of developers were reporting increased developer happiness with the use of Copilot, and we were aiming for 100%. We being GitHub. And why does developer happiness matter? Well, think about it. Did you ever leave a job that you loved? Probably not. By choice, I mean, by choice.
Yeah.
But also we can write more creative code. We can do better. We can do better at our jobs, and also higher retention. That's a lot of what drives us at GitHub to deliver that. For myself, I'll give my own 2 cents, my own opinion of April Yoho. I definitely see the 10x developer. When we talk about cloud and cloud native technologies, things have moved at a pretty fast pace in the cloud, but just enabling us to take off what I like to call the low-hanging fruit. DevOps has been my space for a long time. So what are those pain points in an organization? What are our bottlenecks? And the humans are a lot of the bottleneck. We make mistakes, typing things out, doing things manually. I think being able to remove a lot of that. And we're going to become more of the architect, design, and the planning people as developers. And I remember working on a project years ago, and I remember architecting the code and what it needed to look like, but I really struggled on getting it written and getting the amount of code written that I had to do within the time frame I had.
Yeah.
So I think that starts getting chopped down a lot and going, right, I can architect this. I can design the right solution now. How do we implement it? And I think we see a lot of people skilling up and learning pretty quick with Copilot and AI. So with Copilot's ability to explain why it's done something and to give you feedback and explain things is great. We're also seeing more consistency across code bases because we can reference our coding standards amongst our code bases. So I think I think we're going to see better consistency, the 10x developer, and I think a lot more capability of the end to end, so that as a developer, we're a lot more efficient and we're getting to production a lot faster.
You use the word consistency. That made me think of, as this comes to light, well, I'm just looking at the progression of code generation. And a long time ago, it was IntelliSense. It was you hit a dot and then you get a word. Okay, you get a word. Yeah. And then I remember ReSharper as early back as 2003, suggesting names to variables. And then you get a variable, and then you get a line. And now with Copilot from 2 years ago, okay, you get a couple lines or you get the body of a function. But with the generation, it's almost like you get automatic consistency, because if I'm going to type out the names of variables, it takes a lot of discipline to actually be consistent in variable naming and then across team members. But if the variable names and snippets of lines are generated by a common tool, you almost get more consistency for free, even with personality differences across the team. And so if we're generating more and more lines that we're happy with, that we would have written and say, yeah, I'm happy with the, not generating crap that we then have to maintain, but we're happy with what was generated and it's good and it saves us time. I'm wondering in that time frame, do we end up with just more code being generated and that's the productivity? Or do we look at it and say, wait a minute, now I see more consistency, and do we end up refactoring more out to internal company libraries and thereby have smaller application code bases that have the same amount of features and functions, but are kind of average Git repository size per application is smaller because we end up with more reuse. I'm trying to imagine what it's going to look like. What are your thoughts?
We have a lot of, and this is feedback from an event I was just at. We have a lot of customers out in the wild, in the enterprise space that have mono repos and legacy code bases. And I think we're going to see a huge shift. And you're right, from those to updating the code bases and taking existing code and improve the consistency. I think there's a few things that come into play. One is legacy code bases written by somebody else with no notes, no comments, no explanation. I don't remember what I ate for breakfast yesterday,
tests.
much less why I wrote code 6 months ago.
Yep.
I look back at projects I did years ago and I'm like, why did I do that? But this has been a great opportunity to take Copilot and be like, yeah, make this less horrible, more readable. And I've been updating some of my own code projects because of that. So I think we're going to see a lot of that. We also see a lot of customers that are improving documentation standards, testing methods. There's a lot of space for improvement. And also, because I sit in Europe, I work across folks all over EMEA, and English is the second language. So the way I will word something is different than the way you'll word something, Jeffrey, because you grew up in a different part of the US than I did. Plus, I speak British English, American English, and I work across so many different languages where English is a second language, so it's spelled very differently. I mean, I sat on a code project with a guy for 4 hours, and he's like, I don't know what's wrong with my code. He literally used an S instead of a Z or a Z.
Right. Yeah.
And as a British person, typed it out. So think of somewhere in English, like actually, like, maybe I speak German fluently and I'm, everyone's coding in English, which is fantastic. Like that's an amazing skill to have. But they learn, the British English in school, they learn the U's and the S's instead of the Z's or the Z's. And so just having that consistency in spelling, like simple mistakes. And, I always talk to people and be like, how long did you spend on a mistake? And they're like, oh yeah, days. Right. So using Copilot, how fast is it to remediate? I think that's the improvement cycle we see. So we're going to see a lot of legacy code bases getting up to date. Where the limitation is, and I'll be honest, this is where I see it, with legacy code bases with too many lines of code, and the tokens in the LLMs can't handle that size. That's the biggest issue we're having. We have customers moving off of COBOL. Great example. However, 6 million lines of code.
Yeah.
We can't really index that just yet with specific models. There are ways to do it, but it's not the most cost-effective manner to do it at the moment. That will improve. And it's going to be the same thing with the cloud. We've commoditized AI. GitHub has absolutely commoditized it. So I'm going to see that improving as well. And I think we'll see more and more code bases get smaller, more efficient, and teams be able to put in better standards and practices.
On the smaller front, I was speaking to Jerry Nixon of the SQL Server team. They put out the data API builder, and he flat out said, most developers don't need to be writing entity framework code or queries. And we realize that. And here's our tool that just gives the automatic data layer for CRUD and simple queries. And it's like, blew my mind, but I'm thinking, okay, if he's right, and if entire sections of code bases where previously, a lot of effort gets put into that type of code and it just has to be done. And we find like sections of certain classes of code that can just be converted into libraries and just used. And then of course, Copilot just, okay, this is what you have. It's now just an API. That's huge just for shrinking the amount of code that you would write, even if you were hand typing every line of code. And you're right, it's fewer tokens. It's easier for the Copilot tools to suggest what you need.
Yep.
How is this going to change design? How is this going to change how we decide what to do? Because if we're putting in some prompts or whatnot, we kind of have to have some type of precise language as input, don't we?
Yes, to an extent. And we've used this phrase prompt engineering for a while. And I've spent a lot of time talking to customers that have purchased Copilot, and they're like, yeah, we're not using it. It's going to be a different tool in your toolkit. And I was chatting to a group of friends yesterday, and we were just making visuals of herself, like taking up photos and making the hot things to like make the toy of yourself right now,
right.
With OpenAI. So we've all been doing that, and people are getting different outputs. I'm like, it's all about the prompt. I was like, try a different prompt. And same thing with Copilot. And when Copilot chat was really heavily utilized in about the last year or so, year and a half. It's all about that context and how do we do it. So we've actually put in these agents to help with the context. So we're making it easier, but it's still getting developers to understand what to ask, how to ask it. So a couple things we've done at GitHub is we've put in slash commands. So when you're in VS Code, you can go slash explain, and it will just explain the code base, and you can attach the context of the files. I've done that before, and it's given me an output, and it's good, but it's not everything I wanted. So when we also talk about like edits and the different models, we can be a lot more explicit and a lot more in depth. So instead of saying, can you tell me what this code base does? I can ask it to do that, explain it in a different language. I can give it a whole paragraph of requirements, and the LLMs can now take that on board and refactor a different response for me. So I think the biggest thing with the models is that ability to take more context, paragraphs, and more description and more specification, and output a much, much better response. So it's learning how to ask the right question, and sometimes re-querying the model. Sometimes it's simple as that, or just asking it in a very different way. And it's actually funny. I was speaking to a group of folks in, I want to say, the Netherlands. The Dutch are very exact and very to the point. So with working with AI, that's great. And I was working with some customers in the UK, and they're like, yeah, maybe could we include this and do this? And they're using like the voice to text in Copilot, which is a fun feature to use. And they were saying, maybe, how about this? They're not definitive phrases.
Okay.
And I said to them, I was like, could you be more direct? And they all looked at me and they're like, ooh, oh.
I don't want to be mean to the machine.
It's part of the culture. So I was like, right, just be really direct and say in very much black and white what you'd like. I want this, and this, and be very descriptive. And it was just taking out how their natural language was speaking, because they were using the voice to text with Copilot as well.
Yeah.
And just saying, you need to be absolutely exact. And they're like, okay. And I think it's interesting because we've made AI a lot more accessible to people that aren't traditional developers. So we've released Spark. I would say Spark is very much a fun thing to use and play around with, but a non-developer could write an application, could make a game pretty easily by using the right prompts. And it's a really cool thing to just kind of play around with. If you guys haven't tried GitHub Spark, it's a fun thing to try and use, but you don't have to write any code. So it's, again, learning how to prompt and be specific.
Nice. Well, as we close up here, and we could talk for several more hours about all the things going on in GitHub, but we mentioned workspaces. As we kind of close up, what part of that should developers be kind of using now, and what should they be looking for maybe the next conference or the next release for? So
Workspaces is very good to start with an idea. So my great example is we create an issue in our GitHub repository, and we give it tasks and be very explicit with the tasks. And then you can open in a workspace, and the workspace will brainstorm and make a plan for you. You can add files, remove files, amend it, give it more context, and it will spit out a plan and a starting point. And the way I used it actually recently that I like doing is using some C# code and converting it to another language, Python, JavaScript, whatever. Whoever my audience is, like, great, what language do you all like? Great, let's convert our C# into Python and see what happens. And it converted, X amount of files for us, I think 20 some odd files in a matter of minutes. So I really like Workspaces to initiate and brainstorm an idea and to help me get started, and then help me plan to deploy and then open up the PR. So for bigger, meatier jobs, I think it's great. And we very much put in there to be like a beginning to end journey, but it's very, I don't want to say hands off, but initially it is, because it's brainstorming for you, but it does a lot of the legwork. So I had an old code repository that needs a lot of help. And I put into Workspace and said, let's see what Workspaces will do. And then where that's going to go, I think everyone's going to have to wait and see. So I think we're very public with our roadmap, with what we can talk about for stuff that's coming down the pipeline. There's going to be a lot more coming. I think we'll see some more evolution of the models and the agents, and a lot of third-party capability as well.
Is the start of that intended to be at the point where I would have put hands on keyboard for code, or is the start of that when I start having requirements discussions?
Requirements discussions. So when you open an issue, put in those requirements, and that's where Workspaces is really good. And also we've embedded Workspaces into various parts like PR reviews, etc. So you can either open up your PR review in a code space and dig down deep. Same thing with like dependent bot updates for security updates. But we've also enabled Workspaces to help you achieve and solve a problem, basically, from within the GitHub.com experience. So in the UI experience.
I admittedly haven't even looked at Workspaces or tried it out, but I'm going to, because I've been myself kind of planning and looking to see what tools are going to be useful or even critical in, I would say, this is my own words, my quest for AI-driven development. And I haven't heard other people using that term. I don't know, if it's, maybe somebody are, but that's a natural term for me, my history with test-driven development and all the other. But if I capture all of the decisions that I've made, and now it's in, I guess maybe it's in a chat history or something like that, conceptually, and then whether it's Copilot Edits or not, at some point, it seems like the tooling will get more, maybe it'll take a few years to get there. But if I capture enough design decisions and then there's patterns already in my code, it seems like we could put together a chain of tools that would then, I could say, okay, you know what? I think I've captured everything. Now GitHub Edits or whatever the tool is next year, go. And then I have a feature branch that probably has all the code and changes necessary to make what I just envisioned and decided to do a reality. Is that too far off?
No, I think we're pretty stinking close. I think Workspaces is a great place to kind of have a playground for that. But I think with edits, that's absolutely viable because you can attach the context of the code base or multiple files and add a feature. And it's there in edits now, 100%. I haven't actually done it in Workspace. I've only done it with edits because it's where I'm living and breathing my code, right? I have an existing code base. And I'll look to put in a new feature and I'll say, right, open up a new branch, go, right, this is the feature I want to deploy. This is how I want to do it. And edits is fantastic at getting you there. It's really good. I would rate it for that. I would strongly suggest everyone go and give it a shot in edits.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, April, I want to thank you for coming on the show and kind of giving us a GitHub update. There's a lot of information, and we'll include all the links in the show notes because there's a lot the listeners need to digest. But thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks, Jeffrey, for having me. And thank you, everyone, for listening.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. And until next time, dear listener, keep shipping.
You've been listening to the Azure DevOps Podcast, a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Go to www.azuredevops.show for show notes and other episodes. On behalf of your host, Jeffrey Palermo, and our sponsors, thanks for listening, and may God bless you.